8, it begins by telling us we all have an obligation. Some translations say it differently, but we're debtors. So if I tell you you're a debtor and you have an obligation, does that make you feel happy? You know, when the payment book shows up in the mail for your new car and you say you got a debt to pay, you're not really happy. You like your new car, but you don't like the consequences maybe. But do you like being responsible? Sometimes it's not bad when you're responsible, but what about when you're responsible for someone else? Doesn't that make a little more of a challenge to be responsible for someone else? Sometimes being responsible for things can create a problem, but not as much. But there's certain things in life that we need to take care of, and Romans talks about some of that. Romans 8:17 tells us that as children's God, we share in His treasures. But it goes on to say, if we're going to share in His treasures, if we're going to share in His glory, we must also share in His suffering. How does that make you feel? You see, this parallel experience of sharing in the joy and sharing in the suffering is for all created things. Think about that. All things, animate and inanimate, are waiting for the revelation of God. We know that all creation has been groaning as in the pain of childbirth right up to the present time. All of us as Christians groan to be released from pain and suffering of the world. And that's all out of Romans. And I'm sure you realize that the earth is full of all sorts of things. Right now, we're more prominently aware of viruses than I think we were any other time in life. Some microscopic, nano, tiny, weeny little organism that you cannot see with the naked eye is threatening the very existence of the human race. You know, and these little microscopic nano things can be very unfriendly. COVID-19, as we know, has become a deadly disease. We've always been concerned about returning home when we leave, right? I mean, think about, for years you leave in a car and you come home, and we accept a risk when we do that, don't we? Because the car may break and cause it to crash. Somebody may come left to center and hit us. So we've always accepted the responsibility and understanding that if we leave home in a car, we may not come home the way we left. But today, we leave home, and then we begin to wonder, do we wear a mask? Do we not wear a mask? Do we touch something? Do we not touch something? And we come home, and I hate to say we worry, but we at least think about, did I encounter somebody or something along the way that may have exposed me to this, and I don't know it? You see, we're groaning with creation. The fear has kind of taken over a lot of people. Fear of touching one another. Fear of sitting in any place. Fear of touching a surface without sanitizing our hands. COVID-19 has made a lot of people untouchable because they won't leave their home or their office or their stores or their churches. They're afraid to go anywhere. So the whole of creation waits with eager anticipation for the revelation of the Son of God to be revealed. Paul writes, the whole creation, as I said, has been groaning. Up to this very moment, all of creation has been groaning. And this has been groaning and taking place for a long time, and we're going to talk about that. But if we're going to have a peaceful coexistence with God's creation, there's three things we need to look at today, and we're going to talk about those. Go back to Genesis 2:15 through 20, and it tells us that God created the heavens and the earth in 1:1. We recognize that, right? But the word earth, we don't often look at that whole picture. It means the nature, the ground, the soil, the dirt, all organic and inorganic materials, all living and non-living elements living together in harmony on this ball that we call the earth. And have you ever thought about the earth with all the other things that we know are out there in space? The earth is the only ball that has living life that we've ever found. Now, there may be life out there. If you believe in aliens come from another planet or something, you might think there's somewhere else that people live. But as far as we know, the earth is the only orb in space that sustains life. We haven't found anything. Now, we think we may be seeing evidence at other places, and we're giving a heavy look at Mars and different places, but right now we know that Earth is kind of unique in its creation from the very beginning. And Earth is an active partner with humanity. God created Adam from the ground. All human beings and all of creation are connected. Because if you think back to creation, when God created Adam, placed him in the Garden of Eden, what did he say? Just sit there and enjoy life like you're on a big ocean vacation someplace? He said, no, you're to take care of this place. You're to care for it, to work it and care for it, to till the land. See, he was given a responsibility. And translations have all over the board, to dress it up and keep it, to cultivate it, to work it and watch over it, to cultivate and care for it, to take care of it and look after it, to work the soil, to take care of the garden, to guard it. You see, that's a big responsibility that was put on Adam and all of us. Creation was handed over to human beings to take care of. Now do you see why Romans says we have a big responsibility? Because we have an obligation. An obligation was laid upon humanity to carefully care for God's creation. And not only that, we have to give an account for how we've treated God's environment. Have you ever thought you don't own anything? I've talked about that before, that God gives us the things that we have. We don't own the piece of dirt that our house is built on. Now we have a piece of paper that says we own it, right? But God put it there. God really owns it. We're responsible for carrying a piece of land that we own. But we're also responsible for not destroying or not encouraging, not doing anything to help destruction of the earth. We're all like shepherds who care for and tend to and feed on the sheep. You see, that upholds the principles of law and justice, promoting peace and prosperity for all God's living creatures. Human beings are accountable and answerable to God for all of creation. How have we done with that over the years? You don't have to go far in Jefferson County to see scars left from strip mining, right? Later, they got a little wiser and made them clean all that back up and reclaim the land, and now it's growing and it's being productive again. But I know some areas that still have the big old high walls that were dug into the ground, and nothing's there but dirt and stone. Eventually, nature will take over and it'll grow, but when we do our part to reclaim what we've harvested, it makes a lot better, and it returns quicker to a natural productive state. Every creature is important. Flies, stink bugs. I don't know what purpose stink bugs have. If anybody can tell me, I'd sure like to know. I mean, they kill aphids on soybeans. Well, you better have some good soybeans, is all I can say. Then why are they at my house? I don't have any soybeans in my backyard. Well, now I know. I'm glad he told me. They eat aphids that destroy soybeans. So now we see why. And maybe that's why we have so many more. Have you ever thought of that? Because soybean is a relatively new crop for our area. I never knew that. For years growing up, we didn't have soybeans. We didn't have stink bugs. So you bring soybeans, and you got to bring the creatures that take care of them. So see, they all have a purpose. How many of us like snakes? Everybody here knows what I think of snakes. Didn't take me long after I moved in here to find out that I was blessed with a rattlesnake in the parsonage. So that didn't do me well, but he didn't fare well from that either, even though he's a protected species. There's one left in Ohio. One less in Ohio because, protected or not, he wasn't going to survive my basement. So, but I don't like snakes, but I grew up in a farm community and understand the importance of snakes. Especially black snakes. They eat a lot of rodents and critters that destroy crops and get into feed and destroy the feed. So you think of that. Snakes have a useful part in our society. And I suppose that things like rats do too, but I ain't figured that one out. You got any information for rats, Paul? They feed the black snakes. Well, at least we know how they get along, right? But there are a lot of things that we don't understand. Frogs, I know they eat flies and things, and earthworms, we know that they till the soil that we don't toil, and they fertilize. But the ecosystem is well balanced until we mess with it, isn't it? We do our part to do things, but all of nature takes care of itself. God created it to be self-sustaining. You see, if all those things are taken care of, a lot of threats are removed from us that we don't even think about. How about the basic value of plants? We've got quite a collection of things up here today. I don't know if you've all paid attention to that as you were sitting there. We brought all this in for a purpose to let you think about creation and all of the differences of things in creation. Now, I don't have a mangrove up here, but I'm going to talk about a mangrove plant. Has any here ever talked about mangroves before? I didn't really know a whole lot about mangroves. I've seen some, but never paid a lot of attention. But mangroves are very important to our ecological environment. You primarily find them along the coast. And their root structure is kind of unique because it just kind of intertwines and tangles and goes everywhere. And it's not like a lot of trees that the roots are buried deep in the ground. If you look at this root structure of mangoes, a lot of it's exposed and they're just all over the surface. When a hurricane comes in and all the water washes in on the shore and then suddenly goes back out and disappears, guess what? When the mangoes are there, the coast doesn't disappear. Those mangoes protect the dirt so the dirt does not get washed out into the ocean when a hurricane comes to the coast. Now, when you see all the problems on the coast, where do you see it? When we have come in and made a beach and put all these fancy houses and all these resorts, there's nothing there to protect the soil. And so a hurricane comes in and it washes it all out to sea. You see, God had a plan. And when we mess with it, we destroy the balance of God's creation. Mangrove thickets improve the water quality because they don't allow the dirt to go back out and pollute. And it protects the shore so the land doesn't get eroded and go smaller and smaller and smaller and houses begin to fall. God created everything with a purpose and a value. Even if you and I can't see that value, there is a purpose there. Psalm 104:24 says, "O Lord, what a variety you have made. You've made so many things, and in wisdom you've made them all. The whole earth is covered with your living creations." See, we don't always take time to understand what God has created. Today, creation cries, land laments, animals weep, and the sea creatures are in sorrow. The whole creation wails, Scripture tells us. The entire universe is groaning because of the evils of men. Now, when did that all start? In the Garden of Eden. That's exactly right. Why did it? How do we know it started there? Because Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the forbidden tree, and God says, now you will toil the soil, and the soil is cursed because of that sin. The thorns and the thickets and all that stuff wasn't there before they ate of the tree of life. Did you remember that? That's why we have all the stuff to deal with today that we don't want to deal with, because the ground was cursed because of man's shortcomings. And think of what man has done over the years to manipulate the earth for our benefit. We talked about the mining. There's some places in the world where they dig gold mining and they use this particular chemical to dissolve all the stone and leave the gold behind. But guess what? You can't ever get rid of that sediment because you can't put it anywhere because it will destroy anything that it rinses into. So there are literally pools of this stuff sitting, hopefully protected. They've already destroyed some of the environment, not around here, but in foreign countries. They discovered this would work because when you mine for gold, if you don't get big things of gold, it's so hard to get it out of the stone. But they discovered a chemical that will dissolve the rock and not hurt the gold. So these microscopic pieces of gold amount to tons of gold when you move tons of rock and stone. But now what do you do with the waste? You see, we don't think of those things. We go out and just, we destroy large pieces of land because of development and growth. There's a fear of the rainforest being destroyed because everything keeps encroaching out, and they remove more and more of the rainforest every year. And the rainforest produces like 20-some% of the oxygen for the entire universe, or the entire world, I mean. So think of that. When that's being reduced, you're reducing a significant portion of oxygen. People are greedy and manipulate everything for their advantage. So we need to be careful how we treat our own environment and the resources God gave us. And the second principle that God gave back in Genesis was to fill the earth. Remember that part, right? Adam and Eve were to multiply and fill the earth with like creation. Then what happened after God decided the man was so bad? Do you remember the big flood? Then Noah comes into the world, right? What is Noah told? Noah steps out of the ark into an empty world, right? God told him, multiply. The mandate for Noah is the same mandate he made with Adam. Fill the earth. He commanded them to increase their race on earth, to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish what had been taken away. But you see, filling the earth is not only filling it with people, it means living with the elements of the earth in a responsible way. God created the world. Every single thing that we know was created by God. And we think, well, God didn't make this kneeler. Well, where did the wood come from? God grew the tree that we used to make this beautiful kneeler. So everything we have is because God created things. And it's interesting, kind of a sidetrack here. When God was creating the world, how did he do that? Do you remember? He spoke it into existence, right? Did he speak Adam into creation? It says he made Adam. He formed Adam with his hands. Do you see the difference? God was directly, physically involved in creating you and I. He didn't speak humans into existence like the rest of the world. All of other creation was he formed this and he formed that. He spoke the heavens to show up and to put the light in the sky. That was all spoken. But man, he created from the dust of the ground with his own hands. Can you see the different connection God has with all of his people? We need to love the earth and all the animals and the planets and everything that God has created. Fill the earth with farmsteads and forests instead of big empty holes in the ground. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use the resources God gave us, but we need to be responsible. Jesus used illustrations about nature a lot. The birds of the air, the lilies of the valley, the grass of the fields, the fish of the sea, the soil of the fields, all of those things Jesus used so we could understand heavenly wisdom and knowledge and get a better understanding of what God was all about. We can learn about nature throughout the Bible. The rivers in the Garden of Eden. Well, remember that clear back in the beginning, right? Let's come all the way through to Revelation and we see another river, right? It's a different river flowing from the throne of God, feeding the trees of life. Do you see the big complete circle of how it all comes around? Human and animal conflicts. Do you ever wonder why there's so many humans being attacked by animals? Is it because we went out and encroached on their space that God gave them? You know, when the elephants were left alone in the areas they were, and the tigers and the lions and all the animals on the plains, when they were left alone in Africa, did they kill people? No. There weren't people to kill. Why do you suppose God didn't put people in the middle of that big place? Because the animals look us as a food source, right? So when we encroach out and we build villages and we move further and further out into animal territory, and then we blame the animals for killing somebody and we want to hunt the animal down and kill the animal. Did you ever think that the animal was just doing what it was created to do, was to survive? We look as a threat to that animal. Now you look at, how are we a threat to a lion? Well, the lion doesn't know what we're capable of. And of course, we may have some big gun. So we have to be careful by pointing fingers at the animals and saying, well, that animal did such and such. We try to get too close to animals sometimes. Hollywood loves that stuff. They make all kind of movies about the animals, and just think of Jurassic Park, even though they created them from a test tube, but they didn't like that either, right? They didn't want humans messing with them. What about Tiger King? Anybody here watch Tiger King? Oh, I hear some chuckles. No, the Tiger King guy that raised all the tiger cubs and made all the money by charging you $400 to get your picture taken with a lion cub sitting in your lap. No, it's okay. He was, I don't know. I don't think I'd be hugging these big old full-size lions, and, you know, I love my dog, but I don't think I'd love a lion like that. And of course the battle became, it was all a big TV sensation through Netflix with, I don't remember that lady, but she was against him, he was against her, and all these conflicts. And only reason it made any sense to Netflix to do something with it is everybody was watching it. If we didn't watch that kind of stuff, they wouldn't make that kind of stuff. But they're using animals, exploiting animals for themselves to make money. Now, was he mistreating them? I don't know. It depends on whose eyes you look at when you say mistreat the animals. His animals seemed to live better than hers, and she said his animals didn't live well, but they had monster places, acres of land, and she had hers in pens. I don't know. My debate's not there, but my debate is, why do we get too involved in animals? And then we want to blame the animals for the problems that are created. They're dangerous wild animals. You know, a rabbit will bite you if you grab a hold of a wild rabbit and he gets a chance, he's going to bite you. And you think a bunny's a nice, soft, little furry thing, right? But grab on to a chipmunk and see what he does to you. Woo, I can imagine he'd be biting a chunk out of your finger faster than you can blink your eye. You see, God didn't intend us to mess with them. They're here for a purpose. Some of it's our entertainment, I guess, when we watch them. I love to watch chipmunks and birds and coons, but I don't like them when they make messes on my deck and knock my bird feeders down and all. But see, I hang a bird feeder and I expect the birds to come, right? The raccoon says, that's a source of food for me. Or the squirrels. And then I get mad at them because I'm in their territory, right? You see how the circle goes? We need to respect God's creation. All these things are speak about in Isaiah 24, the land becoming empty. The earth is utterly laid wasted and spoiled, suffers from the sins of the people. The earth languishes, the crops wither, the skies refuse to give their rain. The land is defiled by crime. The people have twisted the laws of God, broken his everlasting command. The curse of God is upon them. Make a note of that. Go home and look up Isaiah 24 and see what Isaiah has to say about the people and how they cared for the land. Human activity often causes negative effects on all of creation. As I said, the disobedience of Adam and Eve brought a curse on the land. And today Christians regard humankind as the central or the most important element of existence. Many people forget that all of creation is central and important to God. A good order of creation brings goodness and coordination between everything. We're learning that today, many years way too late. We're learning how to better work together with our environment to accomplish what we want to do. Farming no longer does the kind of plowing that they used to do, so the wind blew all the topsoil away, or the rains came and washed it all down into the stream. We've learned if we do no-till plowing now, we don't lose all the good topsoil. We don't have to rebuild the land. See, if we'd have been smart and known that years ago, if you think about the Dust Bowl days when it blew all the dirt away, because we didn't know how to work with our environment. Today we're learning. So the invitation for today is for all of us to fill the land with God's word and God's glory. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. The knowledge of God comes by hearing the word of God. See, we're called to spread God's love and God's knowledge to all people. And we do that simply by sharing God's love. Now, we can talk about evangelism, and we can talk about missions work, and all the ways that we're supposed to do things, but isn't the bottom line loving people unconditionally? Because if you love people as Christ loved people, you can make a difference in their world. Our call is not to establish a religion, to destroy things on our way, to try to make things better. We're not to establish structures. I mean, that's what church is all about, right? If you don't have a nice building, you can't have a church. Isn't that what we kind of get into our minds sometimes? Think about how it happened back in John Wesley's days, or when Asbury first came to the United States and started riding a horse. And I found it interesting, the class I just finished, I found it interesting that all of Asbury's things that he had left, he had willed to a gentleman in Wheeling, West Virginia. How about that? There's a connection all the way back to Asbury days, to Wheeling. Somebody he had met, and the guy inherited a lot, man. He inherited his horse, his saddle, and his clothes, and his Bible. That's all that Asbury had left in his life. But it went to that man in Wheeling, West Virginia. The horse was probably wore out. It'd be like one of our cars with 300,000 or 400,000 miles on it or something. Because he rode that horse everywhere. But you see, it wasn't about building buildings. It was about loving the people. Sharing the love of Christ and changing people's lives is what it was all about. Not telling them how bad they are and how terrible they are and that nobody wants them around. You show them that they're perfect in God's creation. That we love them unconditionally. And when we do that, they believe what we tell them about Christ. We can see the glory of God everywhere. God tells us we're to still the earth. That's the third part. Now, to still the earth doesn't mean that we're going to try to stop the earth from rotating or anything crazy like that. We simply need to do what we can to help lay to rest what has been done to the earth and all of God's creation over the years. Back in the Old Testament days, once every 50 years, they let the land rest for a year. Now, how hard would it be for us today? Think of the farmers today that rely on tilling that land and getting a crop. To say, okay, it's been 50 years, I'm not touching a thing this year. But you could do that on rotation. Hasn't that become a big thing if you follow farming? You don't plant the same thing in the same piece of land year after year. Usually after so many years, you do crop rotation. Why are you doing that? To give the land a rest, right? You plant some crop that's a cover crop that you can till in and that it grows again and it becomes its own fertilizer for the piece of soil and rebuilds the soil. I don't know all the technicalities and how it's done and how often you do it, but I try to keep up with that because I grew up around farms and I worked on farms as a kid, and it's important. So we let the land rest in ways that it needs sometimes. Lay the earth to rest. And during the time in Old Testament days, in that 51st year when they let everything rest, listen to some of the things that happened in the world. The world as they knew it. The crime was reduced. Exploitation stopped. Plundering had a full stop. There was nothing to steal because nobody was raising crops. The crime rate reduced when everybody rested. There was no crime. The earth rejoiced over the period, Leviticus tells us. The work of God to bring rest to His creation is handled through us, His people. The land was at rest because everything was relaxed and peaceful. Henry Morris writes, "Men are indeed in the process of destroying the earth and its inhabitants. Note the following partial list of global problems, all which have resulted from human rebellion against the will of God. Global water pollution, global air pollution, global spread of deadly pestilences, diseases and things that destroy the plants, global air pollution, global spread of deadly things, global spread of nuclear and other sophisticated weapons, You know something about nuclear weapons? You can't ever get rid of them. You might take the weapon apart, but what do you do with the nuclear part? We haven't figured that out yet. Not saying the nuclear weapons didn't hold a very important part in our history, but we have to be careful with that stuff. I'm a big proponent for nuclear reactors, but everybody thinks I'm nuts because you can't get rid of the fuel, but we run aircraft carriers and submarines on nuclear power all the time, and we don't have major accidents. Why can't we run major cities on a reactor like that and not have those same problems that we seem to have? But the destruction of the rainforests and other ecological communities, the global spread of addictive drugs, legalization of illicit and illegal activities, chemical pollution of lands and food chains, toxic waste, insecticide waste, noxious substances, animal and plant extinctions. Now think about this. This is Henry Morris that writes this, and his research showed that average one extinction per day throughout recorded history because of the way man treats environment. Think of that. One piece of God's creation becomes extinct every day throughout recorded history. Whether it's a plant, a single cell creation, something disappears because we overuse the resources of the earth. So are all these things true today? Recent reports published on the function of the world and the earth after centuries of the human race is experiencing a long pause. See, we're thinking we have global warming or global cooling, or the oceans are getting too high, the oceans are getting deeper. Whatever is taking place, nobody stops to think that creation is starting to take a pause. It's been long enough. Nature is taking a long pause. And it's causing movements of people, and we're beginning to pay attention to God's creation. The whole earth has taken a rest. And think just what happened to all of God's creation when the news started talking about COVID. Did we all start taking a rest? Maybe we needed a rest. Not for people to get sick and die, but it's caused a lot of people to take note of what's going on around us. I close with Romans 8:22 says, we know that all creation is still groaning and is in pain. Creation.